Okay guys, so today's video is to go over the best exercises to increase your deadlift. So I made a tiers list here, and we've got the categories of best, tier 1, decent, tier 2, and not great, tier 3. So I kept it pretty simple here. I didn't make a bunch of categories, but I think it comes as no surprise. I'll get right into it here. As far as the best deadlift assistance exercises. So these are the best exercises you can do to increase your deadlift. Number one, you guys know what it is. It's got to be 45-degree barbell back extensions. These things are the best deadlift assistance movement out there. Ever since I've stumbled upon these, they've been a complete game changer. They've helped my speed off the floor. They've helped my lockout. They've helped the entire deadlift, all aspects of it. So this is something I like to do where I alternate between sets of 5 one week, sets of 10 the next week. And I've really progressed on these. These have a tremendous carryover. They hit the low back probably the hardest, but then number 2, they hit the hamstrings and glutes as well secondarily. So best posterior chain exercise out there. I think the specificity aspect of it, where you're deadlifting the weight off the ground in that 45-degree position, I think that's why these are such a good option, because you're getting that static component where you're starting from a dead stop on each rep. So that plays a huge role in why I'm so in favor of these. I pretty much know this is my number one indicator exercise. If I progress on these, my deadlift is going to go up, like no questions asked. Now, number 2 for best deadlift assistance movements, I'm going to go with back squats. And whether it's high or low bar, they're both going to translate extremely well. So squats are almost more of a back dominant movement once you get heavy enough compared to, a quad dominant movement. I think Greg Nuckols even has a study about this where back squats past a certain intensity range are more of a back movement than a leg movement. So it comes as no surprise that these have such a high carryover to deadlift. And I really think you can go high or low bar and you're still going to get a tremendous carryover pretty equally between the two. But really like back squats once a week. Hits the back, hits the quads, and if you hit the quads here, it's the best quad movement. Even if it's more of a back movement, you're still going to hit the quads better than just about anything. And what that does is that increases your speed off the floor. So that's going to help you just become faster off the ground. And you're going to hit your glutes quite a bit from squats as well, which is going to help your lockout. So that would be my number 2. Now, my number 3 and the last movement I would put in the best category would be pause deadlifts. Now, pause deadlifts are tremendous because they just strengthen your low back, unlike any other deadlift variation. Now, the whole key to pause deadlifts is the time under tension. So a lot of guys will do pause deadlifts, but they won't pause long enough. They'll cut it short. They'll do a half-second pause, a 1-second pause, whatever. I like to do a full 2-second pause. It should almost be, how I would cue it is, just pause it as long as you can. Literally, pause each rep as long as you can, and that will be long enough. And I like to pause an inch off the floor. A lot of guys try to pause at the knees. Makes it much easier. You're going to get the most out of these by being in the most vulnerable position, which is an inch off the floor. That puts the most stress on your low back. That is how I would cap off my best assistance movements as far as the best bang for your buck. Those are going to be my top 3. And I really don't think anything else can get in that category. Those are the best if you want to improve your deadlift. Now, my decent category, I'd go with banded deads. Banded deads are a variation I rotate in where I put the bands on each side of the bar, but you can also do it where you have one band and you stand on it. There's lots of demos for that online if you don't have band pegs, or a good way to set up bands. But banded deadlifts are really going to help that lockout strength, and they're going to teach you to pull more aggressively, because the one thing about bands is they fire you down faster, and they make you subconsciously have to pull faster. So it's a great way to teach speed, great way to build up the lockout strength. Definitely a variation that's worth having in there. One of the mistakes I would say people make with this is they use too much band tension. It shouldn't be so much band tension that it's killing you, that it's, ridiculous. It should be appropriate to where your maximal strength is. So if I have a 500-pound deadlifter, he's going to use a lot less band tension than a 700-pound deadlifter, or even a 600-pound deadlifter. So it just depends on your level of strength as far as how strong the bands are. Now, another one here, high deficit deadlifts. I rotate these in as well, and I can see the argument with a low deficit because the mechanics don't change as much, but when you do a high deficit, a 3 to 4 inch deficit, it almost changes the lift entirely to where it's a completely different exercise. So much more difficult. This is a great way to hammer the upper back and low back and just push you in an awkward position. So this is another one I like to work in. Those are my main 3 variations, but I think pause is still king of the deadlift variations. Now, Nordic hamstring curls, a great variation. This I like to do off a bench to increase the range of motion. So a lot of people either have the Nordic thing you can buy from Rogue, or they do them on the floor. But I like to do these elevated off a bench because that way I can get that extra, foot or so going down. I can control it more. And I like to go as slow as possible on the way down while keeping my torso straight. So if you start folding at the hips, you're gonna lose a lot of that tension on the hamstrings. It's gonna become a back movement. And then on the way up, barely push off on the ground. Just about everybody's gonna have to push off on the floor. That's okay. That's perfectly normal. But try to push off as little as possible so that you're almost having to do a hamstring curl on the way back up. So that's a really good one. Glute ham raises. I still think Nordics are slightly superior to glute ham raises, but if you have a GHR, it's a great option. Relatively easy to set up. Well, really, that's the one thing people screw up is with a GHR, they'll put the foot plate too far from the pad, which turns it into like a back bowing exercise, and it takes the hamstrings out of it. So big thing you have to do is make sure the foot plate is close enough to the pad, and you'll hit more hamstrings. But this is a great variation to progress on it. You can hold a plate, or you can put a band over your neck and attach to the bottom. So there's a lot of good ways to progress on that and get pure hamstring isolation. I really like that one. Hamstring curls, that's another good one. Not as good as Nordics or GHRs in my opinion, but hamstring curls are a good option because they don't take a lot out of you. They're not very taxing. And that's kind of the theme with where I'm going with these next couple is these machine-based movements can be good. I'll put them in the decent category because they don't take a lot out of you. So hamstring curls, lat pull downs, and cable rows. Those are good. All of them are great options because they're all isolation movements, not taxing at all on the CNS. There's not all this CNS fatigue like you get from heavy compound movements. And I think in terms of lat isolation, upper back isolation, lat pull downs and cable rows are as good as it gets because they're just not as fatiguing as some of these other movements, and they're a great addition to the end of your training session to increase your deadlift. And if you get stronger lats, again, you're going to have increased speed off the floor on your deadlift, so I really like those. Now, my last one I would put in the decent category are Bulgarian split squats. So split squats, I almost put them in the best category, but I held off because I think back squats are superior if you can do them. But if you have injury issues or whatever, split squats are a great alternative because they're still going to hit the glutes and quads. They're really going to isolate those two muscle groups. And you can load them heavy. You can put a bar on your back and really load them up, and there's an increased balance component of them. So that's another one that I really, really like. Obviously, I've been doing them for over a decade, 15 years. Seen a lot of progress with them, and I've pushed them as high as 405, which was crazy. I tore my adductor trying that, so don't go that heavy. But these really will help your deadlift to a pretty good degree. Now, the not great category. So I'm not necessarily saying in this category that these movements aren't worth doing. I'm just saying I'm not as big of a fan of them as these others I've listed. I don't think the carryover is quite as good. And, I'll give my reasons. So number one, belt squat. Belt squat has merit because it doesn't load the back in the same manner that a back squat would. So you can literally isolate your legs without that back loading. It's loading the hips. So if you have back issues, this is actually a great option and might need to be bumped up to the best category. So there's a caveat there. If you have back issues, belt squat is an alternative to hit the quads. Might be a phenomenal option. But if you don't, I would say back squats are so superior, as are split squats, that belt squat doesn't have a ton of merit. It's more of an injury substitute if there are issues out there. Now, my second one here on the not great, cheat rows. And obviously, I have gone crazy heavy on cheat rows. I've pushed them upwards of 585 in the past with really sloppy form. But cheat rows, I kind of mean a deadlift row hybrid. It's obviously not quite a pure row. There's a lot of cheating involved, a lot of deadlifting. But these just are very taxing on the CNS. You could say, well, what about Pendlay rows in a strict fashion? The problem with Pendlay rows is as you go heavier, there's going to be some degree of cheating. So they almost gradually morph into cheat rows along the way, because as you go heavier, that's just going to happen. You're going to get a little more swing and everything. And I think there are better options as far as pull downs and cable rows, which isolate those muscles you're trying to work, whereas cheat row heavily involves the low back. Leg press, again, just better options. Leg press is a good assistance movement for a leg exercise, but there's better options as far as squats, split squats, all that kind of stuff. And leg press can put your low back into a more pronounced lumbar flexion for a lot of people if they try to increase the range of motion too much. Front squats, the learning curve is too hard for some people, and it's too hard to keep in a position. So a lot of people have a problem with keeping the bar in position where the elbows want to dip. They start caving forward. It's hard on the wrists, hard on the elbows, all this kind of stuff. So front squats just aren't very practical, even though on paper they look like they'd be a great movement. A lot of people really struggle to pull this movement off, which is why I put them in the not great category. There's better options. Now, reverse hypers. Reverse hypers are a prehab movement, prehab, rehab. They will help keep your low back healthy, but they're not really going to add strength to a significant degree. So I don't treat them as a strength exercise. I treat them as an exercise to keep the low back healthy in the form of prehab. So this isn't one I would necessarily load up heavy or push heavy all the time, because I just don't think you're going to get as much out of them. My last one for this category are good mornings. Good mornings, again, really low back dominant, lesser so hamstring. But why would I do these when I could do stiff-legged deadlifts, So it's just, I feel there are better options as far as that's concerned as well. And you're hitting your low back to such an extent with deadlifts already. I don't think there's much need for good mornings. So that's my list, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video, please. Subscribe and all that kind of stuff. And I'll keep putting out a video like this once a week. The podcast, just did one with Brains and Gains. And yeah, check out my links in the description. Appreciate you guys watching.